Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. The day I was wheeled into the operating room, my family and boyfriend were all cheering on my foster sister at her competition. My surgery encountered complications. The tumor in my brain was removed, but my nerves were damaged. From then on, I lost the ability to feel emotions like a normal person. I had a brain tumor. I planned to tell my parents and boyfriend about it, but they were busy buying plane tickets to send my foster sister to a competition overseas. Before being taken into the operating room, I couldn't help but call my parents. The phone rang for only 3 seconds before my parents' hurried voices came from the other end. "Sue, we're about to board the plane. Your sister's competition is more important. Talk later if anything." Before I could even say a word, the call was cut off. I stared blankly at the phone screen. At that moment, I happened to see a new status update from my boyfriend Vincent. He said he was going to the ends of the earth, accompanied by a photo of a plane ticket with the country where Lynn would compete written on it. Before losing consciousness, I couldn't stop thinking, if I just die like this in surgery, would my parents shed a tear for me? And Vincent? I thought, after I get out of here, I must talk to him. I had known for a long time that his feelings had changed. The day I returned home with my aunt, it was just as my parents and foster sister had happily returned from abroad. This time my sister had won a major award in the competition, so to celebrate, they had stayed for an extra half-month overseas. They kept posting travel photos online, but no one asked me about the reason for my call that day. The whole family was happily gathered when they saw me, pale, standing in the living room. All 4 of them, without prior agreement, revealed awkward expressions. Yes, for people. Vincent was also present. "Sister, this time Lynn won a big award. You don't mind Vincent coming over to celebrate, do you?" Lynn was the first to react. She quickly approached and intimately linked her arm with mine. Vincent also seemed to realize something, appearing to want to say something, but when he met my eyes, he ultimately didn't utter those false words in front of me. My parents were also a little unnatural, saying nothing more, just casting expectant glances at me. They hoped I would be understanding and let everything go. If it were before, I would have done so. After all, I was always the child they praised as the most obedient. But this time, I looked at them and then slowly brushed Lynn's hand off my arm. Lynn almost instantly teared up, appearing wronged as if about to cry. "Sue, you're so old now, yet you still bicker with your own sister. You're so inconsiderate." My father immediately found a reason to scold me loudly. Vincent also spoke up to defend Lynn. My mother said nothing, just stood there letting them scold me until my aunt came downstairs with luggage packed for me. My aunt grabbed my hand and pulled me to walk out. My father and Vincent then stopped their scolding. "Colding, where do you think you're going this time?" It was my mother who spoke, the woman who always liked to boast that I was obedient, and then turned around to give everything good to Lynn. "Go home with your aunt, just leave her here, and it won't be long before you all bully her to death." My mother turned back, her eyes red and angry as she said this to my mother. My mother heard this and was speechless, not arguing with my aunt but turning to target me. "Sue, you're a child of this family. Do you really want to go with your aunt? If this gets out, it will be very embarrassing," she said. This sentence was delivered with her eyebrows slightly furrowed, in a tone full of disapproval and gentle reproach, as if my decision had caused her great trouble. She had always been like this, very good at using a soft attitude to make me feel guilty. Only now, I completely no longer had the sense of obligation as before, so I just said directly to her, "Yes, I agree. Your surgery was signed for by me. From now on, I only recognize her as my family." "What are you saying?" My father almost immediately flew into a rage. He strode quickly over, intending to hit me, but was stopped by Vincent. My aunt took advantage of this moment, quickly pulling me away, leaving only my mother's voice chasing behind, asking incessantly, "Surgery? What surgery? Why didn't you tell me?" Until my aunt and I sat in the car, she still stubbornly knocked on the car window. My aunt saw this and lowered the window, kindly explaining to her sister, "You know the brain tumor removal surgery? Recently, your daughter was discovered to have a tumor in her head. Because no family member could be found to sign the consent form, she almost missed the treatment time. In the end, we had to find me. Luckily, The tumor didn't develop into malignancy. Speaking to this point, my mother's face had turned pale. Such a big thing, why didn't she tell the family? She muttered. My aunt then smiled and reminded her. Half a month ago, Sue called you sister many times. My mother seemed to remember something, unbelievably rummaging for something in her phone. Sister-in-law, even if you just look at the call history, it's useless. Everyone answered the phone, but who had enough patience to listen to Sue talk? At that time, everyone was busy taking their foster daughter on a plane. After saying that sentence, my aunt didn't pay attention to her anymore, pressing hard on the gas pedal and driving me away. That evening, my mother wanted to contact me, but discovered that all her accounts had been blocked by me. My father, Lynn, and even Vincent were also blocked by me. My parents couldn't contact me, and having just been scolded by my aunt, they didn't dare lower themselves to go find my aunt and uncle. They only knew to spread rumors throughout the family, saying that I was petty and unfilial, that I was jealous of my sister being talented and winning awards, that I was sick but didn't tell the family, and even made my aunt bear the burden. At first, my aunt laughed in anger when she heard this. She told me not to pay attention to the messages in the group. Then she posted my medical record along with photos of her taking care of me in the hospital for the past few days. After that, she also mentioned my parents' names in the family group, asking about their conscience, how they could be so cruel that their own daughter was seriously ill and had to be hospitalized several times because of their delay in surgery, endangering her life. Yet until now, there wasn't a word of concern, and they even turned the malignant tumor in her head into a small matter. Then they turned around to slander their daughter, who was still recovering. My parents were exposed for their lies and went crazy with anger in the family group, sending a series of voice messages arguing with my aunt. But my aunt didn't care, leaving the group right after that night. My aunt hugged me to sleep, her warm hand gently patting my shoulder. She said, "Good girl, they were wrong. Aunt knows you're not at fault at all. If you feel sad, just cry it out. Don't keep it in your heart and feel wronged." Hearing this, I just calmly looked at my aunt. I told her that I didn't feel sad at all. Even from beginning to end, there wasn't a ripple in my heart. Meeting my parents again, I no longer cared whether they cared about me or not, only thinking about how to separate myself from them. The moonlight shone down, and I saw the surprised look in my aunt's eyes. Those eyes, always full of love, widened. Before long, they were filled with heartache. I knew I had a problem. I could clearly perceive other people's emotions, but I myself couldn't feel any emotions. Perhaps this was a side effect after surgery, but I didn't hate the state. I even felt this was better. I still retained my ability to distinguish right from wrong, only seeing things more objectively and rationally. For example, at this moment, I knew clearly that my aunt was someone who was truly good to me. Even though in my heart I couldn't feel gratitude, I also knew that in the future I should try to be filial to my aunt. As for my parents, perhaps they had realized my change, but they were still dreaming the dream that I would take the initiative to return, humbling myself so that they could easily manipulate me as before. But they didn't know that that would never happen again. Half a month later, my parents posted every day online about how good they had been to Lynn and even had people tell me to hear. They wanted me to regret, wanting me to know that if I knew to be as yielding as Lynn, they would also treat me as well as Lynn. Even though for more than 20 years I had actually lived exactly as they expected, in the end, seeing that I had no reaction at all, they began to panic. One day, in front of my company, I saw my parents and Lynn, all three of them together. Beside them was Vincent. "Sue Snow, you've been missing for half a month." Vincent saw me and reflexively opened his mouth to greet me, but in the end didn't say anything, just awkwardly turned his head away. Seeing this, Lynn's face instantly became ugly, far from the radiant princess image often seen on my parents' social media. At this time, Lynn looked haggard, her eye sockets red as if she had just cried. But as soon as she saw me, her eyes lit up. Obviously, they came with no good intentions, but I had no interest in watching their drama. I was just about to ignore them and go inside when my mother grabbed my wrist tightly. She said, "Sue, Lynn is suffering from severe depression because of guilt and self-blame about your matter. The doctor said she needs her loved ones by her side. We've already asked Vincent for his opinion. You will definitely yield to your sister, right?" Seeing that I said nothing, she added, "Now Lynn has a little fame in the dance world in the country. In the past few years, the family has invested no small amount of money to help her achieve this. As her sister, You can't let your sister's career be ruined like this, can you? Made irritable by her harsh tone, I silently withdrew my hand, looking at the 4 people in front of me. Everyone had their own agenda. Removing the filter called kinship, I could see through every calculation of theirs. Even if Vincent wanted to be with Lynn, they had many ways to discuss it peacefully, not drag each other to the company gate to pressure me like this. In the end, they were just testing my limits, seeing if I would still be as obedient as before, willing to sacrifice my own interests to please them. Fine. After a moment of thought, I replied, but before they could show satisfaction, I turned to Vincent and said, 3 years of university plus 3 years of starting a business, a total of 6 years of my youth. I want 15% of the original shares of the company as compensation. Seemingly not thinking that I would ask for compensation, Vincent's face turned slightly ugly. He was just about to say something when I continued, after compensating for the matter between you and Lynn, I will not mention it again. Even if you two get married later, there's no need to invite me. I will not return to the Lynn family. Just don't bother me, and I will disappear completely from your sight. You also don't want your dance goddess to be called a homewrecker. Do you? As soon as I finished speaking, Lynn immediately reacted. She didn't give Vincent time to think, immediately hugging his arm and crying. Sobbing. Vincent, who had always been arrogant regarding money as dirt, now in the age of blind love, finally truly agreed. The company was co-founded by Vincent and me. I held 26% of the shares while he held 35%. Over the past few years, I had successively bought back 10% of the shares. If Vincent transferred his shares to me, I would become the largest shareholder of the company, and certainly Vincent would be gradually eliminated by me. To prevent him from regaining his senses and changing his mind, I immediately took out my phone and called the secretary to prepare the documents and call witnesses. When I firmly grasped the shares in my hand, I sincerely wished Lynn and Vincent 100 years of happiness. I even saw them off to the company gate. Lynn looked at me with a triumphant expression. Sister Sue, you've already taken the money. Don't cling to Vincent anymore in the future. I smiled, calling the security guard to invite them out. My mother stepped out from behind her, also staring at me. She asked me, "You said you won't come home anymore. What do you mean?" Seeing that I didn't intend to answer, she started clutching her chest, accusing me. "You unfilial child. Do you want to make your mother angry to death?" As she spoke, she put on a look of suffering, as if she was made sick by me. But I would never again be softened by her fake illnesses as before. I didn't even bother to look at her, turning to leave. Finally, the satisfied look in my mother's eyes vanished. Sue, what's wrong with you?" She grabbed my sleeve, her face full of worry, her voice trembling. She had realized that the tricks of feigning illness, pretending to yield, and all the tricks she had used before to control me were no longer effective because I no longer cared about her and would no longer compromise and yield for her sake. "Lynn, Mrs. Lynn," I said softly, looking at her and the Lynn family standing behind, slowly saying, "In the future, your family should live well." "You wretch! What are you saying?" My father, who had left my mother alone to play the villain all this time, now angrily spoke up. He hurried forward, intending to hit me, but Vincent beside him wanted to stop him, only to be pulled back by Lynn. In the chaos, a team of security guards that I had called beforehand stood neatly in front of me. At this point, it was my father's turn to be shocked. He clutched his chest as if he was made to faint by me, exactly the same action as my mother just now. By this time, Vincent also finally broke free from Lynn's grip, stepping forward to face me. He looked at me with disapproving eyes. "Sue, you can hate me, but uncle and aunt are still your parents. Doing this to them is too much." Yeah, right? I had no more patience for them. Bending down to take out my phone, I continued to deal with work. Vincent was rendered speechless by my indifferent attitude, about to say something more, but I had already looked up, seriously looking at him. "Vincent, there's nothing more to say between us. You just need to leave the money. I don't want any more contact with you." Seeing the cold and calm expression on my face, finally a hint of panic and bewilderment appeared on his face. "By the way, because you took unauthorized leave for half a month without saying a word, we no longer have enough trust. The company has decided to officially dismiss you from the position of CEO. I hope you can maintain some dignity." Don't cling to me anymore. It's best to disappear far, far away. After saying this, I raised my phone in front of him and, right before his eyes, I blocked all contact through WeChat and the company system. Not caring about Vincent's ugly face, I turned around and decisively walked away. Away as expected, I took over Vincent's position. I also partnered with other shareholders to exert pressure, finally forcing Vincent to sell all his remaining shares. Thinking back, it seems that men really can affect a career. Since driving Vincent out of the company, it has developed more and more smoothly while I was making money hand over fist. He was still immersed in the role of a love saint, dedicating himself to dating his ex-fiancée's sister. To this extent, they still thought they were the winners. Lynn was unbearably arrogant all day, leading Vincent and my parents around various social media platforms, flaunting love and family affection. Of course, all expenses were paid by Vincent. Since retirement, my parents' lives had begun to be difficult. All their savings were poured into Lynn's dance career. Before, they relied on me to maintain a glamorous appearance. Now the whole family was focused on leeching off Vincent. Relatives still came and went, unaware of anything, competing to praise my parents for finding a golden son-in-law. As everyone voluntarily acted as loudspeakers, praising how happy their family was, I bought my aunt a new house, moving her from the old neighborhood to a private house in the city center. My aunt had never entered marriage in her life, nor had children. She treated me like her own daughter. Initially, she insisted on not letting me put her name on the property deed until I said that if she owned the name, this house would not be taken by those leeches. I recalled the image of me acting spoiled with my aunt in my memory, mimicking being affectionate, then leaning on her shoulder. I said, "Aunt, I will live with you in the future. Don't dislike me. Okay?" My aunt's eyes suddenly glistened. She gently patted my back, softly comforting me. "No, no. As long as Aunt is here, my Sue will always have a home." Hearing that I bought a house for my aunt, my parents flew into a rage. They rushed to my aunt's and my apartment complex in the middle of the night, but because this area was very strictly secured, they had no information and were not allowed to stand at the gate for more than 3 minutes. My father's phone call came to my aunt's phone, and he scolded her with vulgar words. In his words, my aunt became an evil person specializing in dividing father-daughter relationships. My aunt calmly listened, then asked back, "Brother, what have you and your sister-in-law done to Sue? Do you really need me to divide?" My father was silent, not letting him refute. My aunt continued to ask, "You say Sue is your daughter, then why in the house is there no bedroom or wardrobe for your child? No bowls and chopsticks for her? Not even her photo in the family picture? You say she's your daughter. Where do you place her?" I looked at my aunt speaking over the phone and was moved to tears. Going to hug her from behind, I remembered that winter when I had no warm clothes to wear, only able to put on all my autumn and spring clothes, shivering in the wind. Returning home, I found no one at home. My parents. I had taken Lynn to see a movie. In the kitchen, there was no food left for me, and I had no money in my pocket. Before fainting, I mustered my last strength to go to my aunt's apartment complex. Her house was 5 blocks away from mine, and that was perhaps the longest journey I had ever walked in my life. Just collapsing anywhere in that snowstorm, I probably wouldn't have been able to reach the shore of peace. Luckily, I made it, and at the gate I saw my aunt holding an umbrella, going downstairs to take out the trash. I saw her shocked and worried face. My aunt ran over and hugged me. I was already numb with cold. From then on, I had a home again. My room was at my aunt's house, my bowls and chopsticks were at my aunt's house. She even bought back the piano that had been sold, letting it quietly lie in the living room. I had long forgotten how to play the piano, but that day I secretly vowed that as long as I was here, I would be my aunt's strongest support. So now, when my father on the phone couldn't answer my aunt's question and started to spew curses, I calmly picked up the phone saying, "This new house? Don't even dream of getting it," adding another sentence, "Even the current house? Don't dream of living in it." If he hadn't reminded me, I would have forgotten. Not only the house, but also their living expenses had always been from my card. Their retirement money and savings had long been exhausted because over the years, they had to spend money on taking Lynn to competitions everywhere and hiring famous dance teachers. Yet they still despised and trampled on me. The other end of the line was silent for 2 seconds, then I heard my father's roar. "Seuss, you dare to go against your parents like this?" The louder he shouted, the more guilty he felt. I had died once on the operating table. Now there was nothing I didn't dare to do. "Mr. Lin," I calmly expressed my feelings, but my father took my words as an expression of resentment. He began to change his tone, trying to apply the old ways, one side scolding, one side offering sweets. He said, "After all, you still blame your parents for being too concerned about your sister. Why don't you think about her pitiful situation, huh? It seems you really dislike the current house being too spacious." After saying this, I hung up the phone, immediately contacting a real estate agent. During the time I was preparing to sell the house, my parents didn't give up. They began to stalk me and cause trouble wherever I appeared, aiming to force me to show my face. I ignored them for 3 days, secretly having people filmed to save evidence, then called the police. Very quickly, they were arrested for 15 days for disturbing public order. My parents had always prided themselves on being people of honor. Unexpectedly, in their old age, they would be put into the police station by their own biological daughter. In front of the police, they cursed and scolded me terribly loudly, recounting my unfilial acts. I found it annoying, so I put on headphones, turned my back, and sat. I told the police officer mediating that I resolutely did not agree to mediation. When being led away, the father, who had always been strict and authoritative in my memories, looked at me with horrified eyes, realizing that I might not take care of them anymore. He began to change his tone, calling me Sue word by word, a tone of intimacy that, since I was 10 years old, I had no longer hoped to have again. But I had no more feelings. Of course, I wouldn't be softened by him. Unfortunately, Lynn had escaped when my parents were arrested. She and Vincent had hurriedly gone to travel elsewhere to protect the reputation of the dance star they had painstakingly cultivated. My parents insisted that this matter was their own calculation, not instigated by Lynn. I imagined Lynn's uncomfortable appearance when she couldn't harm anyone and couldn't stand it. Surely there would be a day she would pay the price. So during this time, I sold the old house at a low price to a tattooed man with a famous reputation in both underworld and legitimate circles. Thanks to this, when my parents hadn't yet come out of the station, Lynn, when returning from her trip with Vincent, stood in front of her old house but couldn't enter. It was said that at that time, Lynn didn't believe the house had been sold, knocking on the door for a long time to demand an explanation. The door opened, and seeing the man, nearly 1.9 meters tall, she was so scared that she didn't dare to utter a sound. In the end, Vincent came to pick her up. Not long after, my parents were also released. When they heard the news that the house had been sold by me, they again cursed heaven and earth, but no one dared to come and bother me anymore. Survival was now their main problem. So very quickly, my parents packed their luggage and moved to live with Vincent. Initially, Vincent still welcomed them, but my parents had been accustomed to flaunting their authority in front of me for so many years. Losing the object to manipulate, they quickly couldn't restrain themselves and began to reveal their bad traits to Vincent. Vincent was also someone who, from childhood to adulthood, had never suffered grievances. Before long, the first conflict occurred. Not long after, my parents were driven out of Vincent's house. He rented them a private apartment half a city away from his house. So my parents again vented their anger on Lynn. They said that when Vincent was with me before, he had never been disrespectful to them like this. Why didn't Lynn advise Vincent? Lynn still had to rely on Vincent's money to continue her dance career. How could she act tough in front of him? As time passed, to maintain her relationship with Vincent, Lynn also gradually distanced herself from my parents. On an ordinary day when Lynn came to visit her parents, she heard them complain about Vincent and at the same time recalled that when I was in charge of taking care of their food and lodging, life had passed so peacefully. That was their familiar trick. Or sun up to put another down, it was all for their own benefit, but Lynn didn't fall into the trap. She had endured enough these days, immediately smashing everything she could in the house. Then coldly she asked them if they thought she was good, why didn't they find her? This was the first time she lost her temper in front of her parents. Now that she had Vincent firmly in her grasp, family for her was just an added flavor to life. She didn't need to look at anyone's face anymore. That time they caused a huge uproar. The The main character was my mother. She stood in front of the apartment door, crying miserably, grabbing Lynn's hair, sometimes scolding her for being ungrateful and unworthy of her many years of teaching and investment. Sometimes she scolded me for being heartless, saying that all these years she had lived like that, just absent once during surgery. Why did I have to make such a big deal out of it? My father felt ashamed, sitting in the room, smoking silently. Lynn didn't give in, wrestling with my mother, scolding her for being a vampire, never satisfied. In the end, they stopped when the whole floor came out to watch. This shook everyone. Relatives who had once flattered them also successively distanced themselves, no longer interacting. A relative recounted my parents' situation to my aunt and me while speaking, sighing deeply. Before, your brother and sister-in-law really liked hearing people praise them for knowing how to raise children, saying Lynn was the child of a comrade in arms, raised like a princess, all thanks to their benevolence. Who knew in the end they'd raise a white-eyed wolf? He spoke while looking at me with a flattering gaze. Sue, you have to say you have a discerning eye, choosing a precious gem like you. Now just enjoy the blessings. However, my aunt was not very satisfied, immediately driving him out unceremoniously. When the door closed, my aunt was still angry. When you were young, he often ridiculed you as an illegitimate child. Now his son graduated and needs to find a job, he immediately flatters you. These people really know how to step on the low and lick the high. Yeah, I didn't have many feelings for this kind of person. In the first half of my life, I had met no less. Only in the warm yellow light, seeing my aunt's worried face for me, did a feeling of warmth suddenly rise in my heart. A short but deep moment. Only at this moment did I vaguely realize that my aunt's dark hair had begun to show strands of silver. I stepped forward, took her hand, told her not to be angry, then invited her to a big dinner. I said to my aunt, actually what he said wasn't right. It's not that aunt has a discerning eye choosing us, but that I was lucky to meet aunt in the sea of ordinary people. Meeting someone willing to shield you from the wind and rain without resentment is an extremely lucky thing. Under the light, my aunt's eyes gradually softened. She couldn't help but turn her back, wiping her eyes for a while before turning back to look at me and give a smile. What nonsense are you talking? Aunt, is your aunt your flesh and blood? Aunt loving you is a matter of course. I worked even harder, relying on my clear and objective vision. The company's profits multiplied, and my asset value also increased accordingly. The next time I met Vincent was at a business party invited by a partner. Vincent wore a finely tailored suit, meticulously groomed, yet still unable to hide the haggardness on that once proud face. Looking closely, the clothes he wore were still from last season's collection. It seemed that after raising a family full of vampires, his life was not easy. Raising Lynn cost no small amount of money, and the living expenses on my parents' side were also not small. If Vincent was willing to bow his head to his family, it might be okay. Only his parents had very high standards. In the past, they didn't value me, someone who started a business from scratch with Vincent. Now they even more despised Lynn, someone who only knew how to cling to others. If Vincent wanted to receive support from his family, he had to break up with Lynn first. It could be seen that he loved her very much, so at this time, he was willing to lower himself, bowing his head to apologize to the small bosses whom he didn't take seriously in the past. Only those people whom he didn't value in the past now seemed to not value him either. The boss who had been overly bothered by him, when seeing me, almost instantly lit up while greeting me. He quickly approached Vincent, who was caught in a dilemma, only able to stand there awkwardly. Just in the moment when our eyes met, his eyes contracted, no longer with the pride of the past. When the company first started, Vincent didn't care about the social relationships at banquets. The work of socializing outside was always done by me. Now the company and partners had all gotten on track, and those people of course only recognized me, not him. This was only natural. I didn't know what Vincent was lamenting. Only in the next second, as if determined about something, he took a step towards me. I turned around softly, saying a few words to the person beside me, and security immediately stopped him. Outside, he couldn't even get close to me within 3 meters, finally being politely invited out of the hall. At night, when the party ended, when getting my car, I ran into Vincent still waiting beside me. I looked at him standing in front of me, recalling all our past again. After confirming that everything that had happened was as clear as black writing on white paper, Without any point of entanglement, I didn't hesitate at all, turning around to get into the car. Vincent hurriedly raised his hand to block the door, the car door clamping on his hand, creating the crisp sound of finger bones breaking. Vincent's face instantly turned pale. He held his injured hand tightly, his eyes still fixed on me. Do we really have to be like this? His voice became hoarse with pain. I lowered the car window, throwing out a stack of 10,000, lightly smiling. Looking at him, medical expenses, then not caring whether he accepted it or not, I loosened my fingers, then pressed the gas pedal and sped away. From the time I met Vincent again, I had maintained a bit of vigilance. Sure enough, not long after I saw Lynn, whom I hadn't seen for a long time, appear in front of the company gate. If I remembered correctly, she should be participating in a very important competition at the City Theater. At that time, the organizing committee had sent me an invitation to watch, and in the list of attendees was her name. But now, she wasn't even wearing dance attire. Her face was deliberately made up to look haggard, clearly aimed at me. Upon seeing me, Lynn immediately showed a pitiful look. Without saying a word, she knelt down. "Sister, I beg you, please forgive Vincent. Now he's your brother-in-law. How can you take revenge on him like this because of your emotional issues?" Her crying and pleading was even better than singing. I raised my head. Sure enough, I saw a few professional cameras in the crowd gradually gathering around. Lynn was calculating in a very calculated way. I removed her hand that was tightly gripping mine, coldly saying, "Lynn, speak clearly. You are the one who stole my boyfriend, then couldn't control him, letting him stalk and harass me. For legitimate self-defense, I took action against him and even compensated for medical expenses. What else are you not satisfied with?" My voice was not loud nor soft, just enough for everyone around to hear clearly. Lynn's face turned pale, her eyes looking at me full of resentment. The whispering discussions around grew louder and louder. I knew for sure that she still had one more move. Sure enough, after a long cry, two familiar figures appeared in front of me. If I still had emotions, surely at this moment I wouldn't be able to help but laugh out loud. I had to admit that their relationship was really good. Last time they had made such a big scene, and in the end they could still reconcile with Lynn. Unfortunately, I now had no more emotions, so when I saw my parents intending to open their mouths, with a glint in my eyes, I immediately raised my hand to stop them and signaled to the secretary beside me to turn on the recording equipment. A few cameras immediately pointed directly at them. With calmness and slowness, I said, "From now on, everything you say I will keep as evidence and will pursue it to the end legally. As long as there is half a sentence of defamation in it, I will definitely sue and pursue it to the end." Hearing me say this, my father's face instantly turned ashen. My mother's lips moved several times, intending to open her mouth, but in the end still couldn't say a word. I didn't have enough patience to wait for her to gather momentum, turning around to walk away. At this moment she hurriedly rushed over, hugging my leg and bursting into tears. She asked me, "Child, what exactly is going on? I am your mother. Haven't you treated your mother like this before?" She cried while recounting the difficulties in the years of raising me. She said that adopting the daughter of a comrade in arms had been too hard. Over the years they had also lived very miserably. She told me that I was previously a very understanding child, always sympathizing with them. But just because of one illness without visiting, why had I become like this now? Mother is really regretful in the days when you didn't bother to look at your mother. My heart ached so much. The face that once looked at me with a haughty attitude was now full of weakness and pretense. She raised her head this time, crying and pleading more sincerely than before. Seeing that I was not moved at all, she hugged my arm even tighter. "Do you really want to treat your mother like this? You don't need your mother anymore." I bent down, looking at her tear-filled eyes, but in my heart, there wasn't the slightest ripple, only thinking about how to respond so that the company's image wouldn't be affected too much. Suddenly, a pair of strong hands pulled her away from my leg. I raised my head, seeing my aunt with red eyes full of anger. My aunt pointed at my parents and Lynn, shouting like a lioness protecting her cub. "The things you people have done, I have evidence of them all. Don't force me to expose them all to the public. Sue has endured so much hardship to get to where she is today, and you still come here to pressure her? Are you really her parents? Enough." This is my family matter. It's not your turn to interfere. From the distance came my father's shout. My aunt heard this, suddenly giving a bitter smile, pointing at Lynn, who was still standing still, and saying to everyone around, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the foster daughter of my elder brother, the one whom my brother abandoned his own biological daughter to care for." Hearing her name, Lynn suddenly shrank back. She seemed to realize something and frantically rushed towards my aunt, wanting to stop her from continuing to speak, but it was too late. My aunt turned to look at my mother, who was still sitting on the ground, and said loudly, "My brother actually has no comrade who sacrificed himself. She is the illegitimate daughter of my brother with his first love after he got married." A sentence like a thunderbolt struck my mother, who was already stunned. Instantly standing up, she looked at my father with eyes both shocked and angry, but still not daring to be sure until Lynn couldn't bear the pressure, turning to run into the crowd behind my mother. At this time finally woke up, rushing over to grab her, staring at her face for a moment, then suddenly slapping her hard across the face. Lynn painfully screamed. This slap was very strong. Lynn, since entering the Lynn family at the age of 6, had always been doted on by my parents like Jade, never having to endure such treatment. Her eyes, which had always shown an innocent look, were now filled with tears, but that very look of hers only made my mother even more agitated. You, I treated you like my own biological daughter. Yet you treat me like this." My mother picked up anything that could be used as a weapon beside her and hit Lynn while she struggled to dodge, looking at my father with pleading eyes. People around were all watching a good show, no one expecting that originally coming to blame me, this family would start to fight among themselves. The paparazzi hired by Lynn to secretly film had also been invited out by my private security when my aunt led me away from there. On the other side, my father had just been slapped by my mother to protect Lynn, then in turn pinned her down and beat her. Seeing the situation becoming more and more chaotic, the security personnel went to clear the crowd. This time their whole family was again taken to the police station, but this time I had brought a few paparazzi hired by Lynn along with the articles that had been prepared by her to slander me. The charges of disturbing public order and defamation. Lynn couldn't escape. In the end, it was Vincent, his arm still in a cast, who hurriedly came from his home to pick up people. The incident at the company gate today had attracted too much attention. All had gone on local trending topics. Perhaps on the way here, Vincent had learned about the incident, but when he saw Lynn disheveled at the police station, his face was still full of astonishment. "Lynn, shouldn't you be at the competition?" His eyes fell on Lynn when he saw that under her coat was not a performance costume. He became even more silent. Initially, Vincent loved her because she had the appearance of an artist obsessed with art. He supported her to pursue dance as if compensating for himself when he had dared to bravely pursue his dream in the past. He even willingly gave up his self-esteem, bowing his head to engage in the mundane life of making a living. But now that appearance was gradually collapsing. Lynn, because she wanted to come here to slander her foster sister, was willing to give up the competition that she had once said was more important than human life. People are like that sometimes, impulsive and reckless, but enlightenment is only in the blink of an eye. Seeing Vincent's doubtful eyes, Lynn was clearly panicked, tears falling in torrents, hardly explaining. "Vincent, it's not like that. It's my sister. She had people interfere in my competition. I had no other choice but to do this. I just wanted to ask her to let me go." This was Lynn's original plan, coming to my company, combining with my biological parents to slander me, turning me into a cruel foster sister jealous of her foster sister, then taking advantage of this opportunity to accuse me of secretly manipulating things, causing Lynn to not be able to win the award she deserved. Even if she had to miss this competition, she could still become famous through the wave of public opinion and thus had nothing to lose. It was a risky move, but Lynn dared to gamble because she believed that my family would stand behind to support her. She thought she could bury me under the wave of public opinion. In my opinion, unexpectedly, my aunt had discovered the truth that Lynn was actually the result of an affair between my father and his first love after he got married. Just one wrong move and her whole game collapsed completely. Until now, she was still trying to dump dirt on me. Only before Vincent entered the door, my assistant had summarized the whole incident for him, including Lynn's transaction with the paparazzi and the slanderous words that they had prepared to blame on me. Many things had not yet happened but had been described by them in great detail, seemingly certain to happen. The organizing committee of the competition had also issued a notice. They had organized the competition for many years with a long-standing reputation and were very indignant that Lynn not only didn't participate but also intended to slander them, especially some high-level staff who had relationships with the Vincent family. Even if he wanted to cover it up, they still knew about Lynn's existence. The plan to gradually make Lynn famous and then bring her into the Vincent family completely failed. I didn't know what mood he came to see Lynn in, but Lynn's act of lying right when they met had put an end to her in Vincent's heart. Vincent's illusion about Lynn had shattered. Vincent's eyes towards her also completely cooled down. He didn't even say a word, turning his back and walking away, leaving only a bewildered Lynn looking at her last hope gradually drifting away. With no Vincent standing up to compensate for the losses, Lynn was given a 15-day detention. Also locked up in there were my parents, living luxuriously their whole lives in their old age. They went in there twice in 1 year. In addition, the affair and marriage was exposed from the previous praises when adopting Lynn. Now my father had to bear countless ridicule and mockery. Before leaving, he asked me one last time, "Do you really want to turn against us like this?" I turned back and slowly said, word by word, seriously, "I'm not making things difficult. I'm just trapped in a life in the dark for too long and want to get out of the storms that have surrounded me for so long. I just want to live a life of my own, no longer bound by kinship, no longer placing hope in unworthy people, no longer yielding and sacrificing myself to exchange for a little peace in their lives. Understand? I no longer love you two. This is the last time I call you two like this. From now on, everyone takes care of themselves, parents." After saying this, I didn't see clearly what my father's face looked like. I turned around and left. In a sidelong glance, I saw my mother had long since burst into tears. Seeing that I intended to leave, she anxiously opened her mouth wanting to say something, but in the end still couldn't utter a word. To this moment, perhaps she truly regretted spending her whole life personally pushing her own daughter away, only to benefit others. But all that, what did it have to do with me? For 20-odd years I had suffered. Had tears for them enough already. Leaving the police station, my aunt was waiting for me in front of the door. My aunt was one of the few people who truly understood my father in this world. She worried that my attitude would cause my father to lose face, and then he would do something unfavorable to me. As for Lynn, she was also not the kind of person who would be at peace. My aunt spoke, her worried face becoming even more obvious. I gently placed my hand on my aunt's hand, saying that now we were no longer as weak as before. If anything came, we would deal with it. Hearing this, my aunt was somewhat relieved. After that, I always had people track the whereabouts of the Lynn family. I knew that Vincent and Lynn had broken up. Lynn, unwilling to accept it, had repeatedly come to Vincent's parents' house to make trouble, and in the end was dealt with decisively by them. My parents had spent their whole life's assets to support her. But in just a short time, Lynn was completely blacklisted in the domestic dance world. From then on, no one mentioned her anymore. Losing her backer, Lynn turned back to cling to my father, constantly harassing my parents. Yet when my mother saw Lynn, her heart was filled with resentment. She wanted to divorce my father, but my father didn't agree. She only had the option of venting her anger on Lynn every day. During this time, my business developed continuously, tending to expand to the international market. The Vincent family, who had previously looked down on me, now took the initiative to send me invitations. Vincent had repeatedly tried to contact me, but I never responded. Later at a party, Vincent and I met again. He looked more mature and sophisticated than before, only his eyes looking at me were full of regret. "You are so much more outstanding now, I almost didn't recognize you anymore," he said, treating me. He didn't know where to look. A person who had been confident his whole life now, in front of me, couldn't even lift his head. Obviously, he hadn't changed much but had lost his original arrogance. As if afraid of being driven away by me, Vincent quickly spoke incessantly. He said that he still owed me an apology that had never been spoken. He said that after so much time, he had finally realized that he had never truly loved Lynn. He was just using her as a shadow of himself, thinking that through her, he would find his true self.